There's a moment, right before someone insults a person without knowing who they're talking to, where you can almost see the mistake happening in real time. I got to watch that mistake unfold up close, standing next to a man who thought he was the main character of a story he didn't even understand yet. My name's Adam. I'm 32. 6 months before that dinner, I'd come out of a relationship that ended not with a fight, but with a slow, mutual shrug. The kind of ending where you both just admit you'd been roommates with benefits for a year. Since then, I hadn't been looking for anything. I'd gotten used to people treating my love life like a group project they hadn't been assigned to, but wanted credit for anyway. I wasn't bitter. I was just tired of being managed. The restaurant was one of those low-lit places with exposed brick and candles stuck in old wine bottles, the kind of spot my friend Marcus picked because he thought ambiance could fix a bad idea. He'd been trying to set me up for months, and this time, he'd roped in his coworker Brad, who had the perfect match for me, a woman named Priya from his office. The whole dinner had the energy of an audition nobody agreed to. Marcus kept glancing between me and the door like he was watching a play he'd directed badly, checking to see if his casting choice was going to work out. Brad had already ordered a second round before anyone else finished their first, loosening his tie like he was settling in to enjoy a show. I could feel the shape of the evening before it even started, everyone at that table waiting to see how I'd react, like my love life was a group performance they'd all bought tickets to. I noticed her before Brad ever pointed her out. She was already seated, scrolling her phone with the particular stillness of someone who'd rather be reading a book at home and had made peace with that fact days ago. She wasn't dressed to impress the table. She was dressed like someone who'd had a long day and still showed up anyway, out of politeness more than hope. There was a stack of napkins folded into a small, neat square in front of her, untouched, the kind of habit that told you she needed something to do with her hands while she waited for a room to prove itself worth her time. Brad leaned toward me before she even looked up. "Fair warning," he said, grinning like he was doing me a favor. "She's more of a backup plan." The girl I actually wanted to bring couldn't make it. He said it loud enough that it wasn't really meant for just me. The table went quiet in that specific way. A room goes quiet when everyone's waiting to see if the joke lands, or if someone's about to get hurt by it. Priya didn't flinch. She didn't look up right away either. She finished the sentence she was reading, set her phone face down, and looked at Brad with an expression that wasn't hurt, just mildly unimpressed, like she'd heard worse jokes from better comedians. Marcus shifted in his seat, the kind of shifting that meant he wanted the floor to open up and swallow either Brad or the whole evening, whichever came first. "Good unexpected or emergency exit unexpected?" she asked me directly, ignoring Brad entirely, like he'd already used up his turn to speak for the evening. That was the first thing she ever said to me, and it told me more about her than Brad's whole pitch had. I laughed before I meant to. Marcus looked relieved. Brad looked confused, like he'd expected the joke to be the highlight of the evening and hadn't planned for anyone to just step past it. "I don't think backup plans usually have better opening lines than the actual plan," I said. It wasn't a big line, it wasn't a speech, but it was enough to close the door on Brad's little performance without giving him the satisfaction of a real reaction. Brad laughed it off too quickly, the way people do when they realize the room isn't on their side anymore, and changed the subject to something about a golf trip nobody had asked about. Priya picked her phone back up for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make it clear she wasn't performing gratitude for me either, then set it back down and looked at me properly for the first time. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, once the table's attention drifted elsewhere. "I know," I said. "I wanted to see if you needed it. You clearly didn't." She almost smiled at that. Not fully, just enough to tell me she'd clocked the difference between rescuing someone and simply refusing to let cruelty go unanswered. We ended up talking past the point where it was polite to keep including the rest of the table. She worked as an actuary, which she told me with the deadpan delivery of someone used to watching people's eyes glaze over at the word. "I calculate the odds of bad things happening to strangers for a living," she said. "It's a great icebreaker at parties. People either lean in or physically back away." "Which one am I doing?" I asked. "Leaning in." "Barely. I'll allow it." She told me about her downstairs neighbor who kept a rooster illegally in a Brooklyn apartment, and how she'd spent 4 months in a passive-aggressive note war with him before finally leaving out coffee one morning as a peace offering, which somehow ended with them becoming friends and her occasionally rooster-sitting. She told the story with the same flat, dry delivery as the actuary line, no exaggeration needed, and I found myself laughing. A real laugh, not the polite kind you give to be nice. "Your turn," she said, pointing a fork at me like it was a formal request. "Tell me something that makes you sound slightly unhinged." I told her about the year I taught myself to fix watches from a library book, because I didn't like paying someone $40 to replace a battery, and how I now owned 9 dead watches I refused to throw away because one of them might still be fixable. She didn't laugh at that so much as nod slowly, like I'd just confirmed a suspicion. That's not unhinged, she said. That's just quietly stubborn. I respect it. High praise from an actuary. We don't hand it out for free. She noticed things too, quietly. At one point I mentioned my dad, and something in my voice must have shifted, because she didn't ask a follow-up question. She just let it sit there for a second, before moving the conversation somewhere lighter, like she understood. Some things don't need to be poked at just because they were mentioned. Later, when the table finally broke apart to split the bill, she stepped outside first to get air, and I followed. Not because anyone expected me to, but because I wanted to. Outside, the night had that late fall bite to it, streetlights doing more work than the moon. She wrapped her coat tighter, and looked out at the street instead of at me. For a moment neither of us said anything, and the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of pause that happens when two people are both deciding how honest to be. A bus went by, throwing yellow light briefly across her face before the street went dim again. You know Brad didn't invent that line just now, she said. People have called me the backup plan for most of my adult life. Blind dates, my sister's weddings, even a coworker once introduced me as the reasonable one, at happy hour, like reasonable was an insult. I didn't rush to fix it, I just listened. That's a sentence with history behind it, I said eventually. She looked at me then. Really looked. Like she hadn't expected anyone to notice the weight behind an offhand comment. Most people just say sorry and change the subject. I'm not most people's dates, apparently, I said. I'm the backup's backup, remember? That got the real laugh out of her. The unguarded one, not the polite one from earlier. I don't want you asking me out because you feel sorry for how dinner went, she said, direct as ever. If you ask because you actually want to, not because Brad made an idiot of himself. Then you pick, I said. No restaurant Marcus or Brad has ever set foot in. No group chat updates. Just us. Wherever you'd actually want to go. She thought about it for a second, like she was running actual odds in her head. There's a used bookstore on 9th that has a cat named Ledger who ignores everyone equally. I go there when people annoy me, which, lately, is often. Ledger, I repeated, an actuary's cat. He does the same job I do, judges everyone silently, and offers no comfort. We met there the following Saturday. The bookstore smelled like old paper and coffee grounds from the shop 2 doors down, sunlight cutting long stripes across the wood floor. Ledger, the cat, sat exactly where she said he would, on top of the poetry section, entirely unbothered by either of us. She showed me her favorite section, actuarial textbooks shoved next to true crime, which she said was thematically accurate. And I found myself laughing again at how she delivered even the mundane like a punchline she'd already perfected through repetition. I noticed she dog-eared pages instead of using bookmarks, which she defended fiercely when I pointed it out. Bookmarks fall out. Dog ears are permanent commitment, she said, and I told her that was either the most romantic or most terrifying thing anyone had said to me that week. At the register, the owner greeted her by name and asked if Ledger had behaved, which told me this wasn't a place she'd picked at random to impress me. It was a place that already knew her, the way a good neighborhood spot knows a regular. She bought a second-hand paperback with a cracked spine, paid an exact change she'd clearly counted out in advance, and handed me a second copy of the same book without asking if I wanted it. Homework, she said. I don't date people who haven't read at least one thing I care about. Is this a date now? Don't ruin it by asking. Good unexpected or emergency exit unexpected, she asked again, echoing her own line from the restaurant, and this time there was a smile underneath it she wasn't bothering to hide. Good, I said. Very good. We stayed 2 hours longer than either of us had planned, neither one of us reaching for an excuse to leave. At one point she read me a passage from an old paperback in a voice that made the words sound better than they probably were on the page, and I realized I wasn't just listening to her, I was paying attention to her. The specific way she tucked her hair back before certain sentences, the way she paused before punchlines like she was giving the room a second to catch up. Near the end, standing by the front window with Ledger asleep between us on the windowsill, she went quiet for a second, the kind of quiet that comes before something honest. I used to think being called a backup plan meant something was wrong with me, she said. Took me a long time to realize it just meant I was standing next to people who couldn't tell the difference between quiet and small. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit there the way she'd let my comment about my dad sit earlier. No fixing, no rushing past it. For what it's worth, I finally said, I don't think you've been anyone's backup plan today. Not once. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding whether to believe it. Accepted, she said quietly. Not erased, but accepted. That's fair, I said. I'm not asking you to forget the version of tonight, where Brad opened his mouth. I just don't think it gets to be the only version that counts. She didn't answer that right away, just tucked her hair back the way she did before certain sentences, and I understood by then that meant she was choosing her next words carefully instead of not having any. Most people move on from the compliment faster than the insult, she said finally. You didn't rush either one. I noticed that. I figured you'd notice, I said. You notice everything. Occupational hazard. We walked out together into the last of the afternoon light, Ledger watching us go from the window with the same flat indifference he'd shown all day, and I remember thinking that felt like a sign. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet, ordinary confirmation that the evening had actually meant something. She didn't take my hand. Not yet. But she didn't step away either, walking close enough that our shoulders brushed twice on the way to the corner, both of us pretending not to notice. The street had gone quiet in the way streets do late on a Saturday afternoon, just the occasional car passing, the paperback she'd bought me tucked under my arm, like proof something had actually happened. So, she said, stopping at the crosswalk, was I worth being someone's actual plan? I looked at her, unhurried, no performance in it. You were never anyone's plan B today. You were just the only plan that made sense. She didn't say anything else. She just smiled, the real one, the one she didn't bother hiding, and for the first time all evening, neither of us had a single reason left to leave. The light changed. Neither of us moved to cross right away.